Hey, how are y'all doing?
Good. Hello. Uh,
Oh, I still have my social media up. There you go. Sorry, I can leave that. Um,
Well, thank you for
how are y'all
joining us.
doing?
We're doing great.
Absolutely,
My
that's great.
name's Tom Conwell. I'm a member of the board of the Jefferson County Libertarian Affiliate. We've got you on Zoom. We're also doing this over Facebook tonight, and we have some people here in person watching.
Oh, great.
So thank you for taking the time to be with us tonight.
I'm happy to do it. Tom, right?
Tom, that's correct.
Yeah, great to meet you, Tom.
Likewise, likewise. Um, let's see what time we got here. 5 after. So shall we go ahead and begin, everybody? Spike, did you have any opening remarks you want to make, or would you like to? We've had some topics that we ran through your associate, and we could talk about those.
Yeah, let's do that. So, I mean, I'll just say thank you guys for having me here at the Jefferson County affiliate Zoom meeting, or I guess in person and Zoom meeting. I greatly enjoyed my time when I was in. You guys are in Colorado, right?
That's right. Yes, that's
Yeah, I
outside of
greatly.
Denver.
Oh, okay. I greatly enjoyed my time in Denver and Golden a couple months ago when I was there. I love my LP Colorado Liberty people, so I really appreciate being here. And yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions you have or anything else.
Okay, well, great. Well, obviously, the big topic in the news today is Afghanistan, and President Biden is staunchly defending his decision to withdraw. Um, his opponents and his critics are ganging up on him over this and
Right,
over the chaos and the problems that have occurred since then. But
right.
why don't you give us your thoughts on this whole mess and what you're thinking about it?
So I think, in my opinion, the two biggest mistakes that Joe Biden made was that number one, he didn't keep with Trump's original May pullout timeline, which I think is what led the Taliban to say, "No, we're not waiting till September 11th. We're going to go ahead and just take the country over." The May deadline came and went. The Taliban didn't really do anything in terms of trying to take over. I think if we had stuck to that deadline, we wouldn't be seeing what we're seeing right now. And I also think that if right from the beginning, and this should have started with Trump, honestly, anyone who was serious about withdrawing during the time that they were in office, including Trump towards the end, they needed to have started fast tracking the process of getting American civilians, American contractors, Afghan civilians that helped with the effort there, interpreters, people that are going to die if they're left there. There was no need to repeat in Afghanistan what was done in Vietnam when the Montagnards and everyone else that helped with that war effort were just left behind to be slaughtered wholesale. And I think that's what we're going to see happening. Interestingly enough, one of the first things the Taliban announced when they were taking over is that they would be confiscating civilians' weapons because they don't need them anymore for safety or personal protection. The Taliban's in charge now; you're all safe, and I think we know where that's going to go. Other than that, I don't believe that there was going to be a pretty way to pull out of a 20-year occupation. I think when you get into something that deep, it's going to be, that pulling off of the band-aid is going to be ugly, because the reality is, even if we didn't know, I'm not sure anyone knew that the Afghan army was going to fall in like 7 days or 8 days or however long it took, but we knew it wasn't going to last. We knew that the Afghan government that is in place is a puppet government. It was only, I think, 3 or 4% of the Afghan population participated in the last election. This was not a government that was recognized as the legitimate government of the Afghan people. The Afghan people mostly are more concerned with their tribal affiliations than any national government anyway. And most of them that cared about a national government were at least just as fine with the Taliban as they were with the people in that the US put in charge. So I don't think that it was going to be pretty. I think we need to look at why this war was even done in the first place. Why were 20 years and almost 2,500 American lives, not to mention the tens of thousands more who came home alive but scarred? Traumatic brain injuries, post-traumatic stress disorder, chronic health issues, all sorts of psychological issues and everything else. Why, not to mention the hundreds of thousands of dead Afghans, and the trillions of dollars that were spent in this country. Once you factor in the debt and the inflation through 2050, we're looking at $6.5 trillion having been spent in Afghanistan. That's insane. To put that in perspective, the gross domestic product, the entire economic value of Afghanistan is just under $20 billion. We spent something like 3,000 times as much as the Afghan economy is actually worth, or 3,000, 300 or 3,000, several times more than the Afghan government is even, or the Afghan economy is even worth, was wasted, robbed of the American people, not to mention the thousands of dead Americans, the tens of thousands of traumatized Americans, and the hundreds of thousands of dead Afghans, and millions of traumatized Afghans. Why was this done? Well, we know it wasn't done to get bin Laden, because Mullah Omar wanted to give away bin Laden. If you'll recall, when all that was happening, in the midst of, incredible pressure from the U.S. to hand him over, with, troops amassing at the borders on all ends in Afghanistan, and pressure from the Muslim world not to give up bin Laden, Mullah Omar's opening offer was to give bin Laden to a third-party country to be tried and punished all the way up to execution if needed, as long as the evidence was presented to them first that he was responsible or had a part to play in 9/11. Our counter offer could have been, no, we want him, but we will give you that evidence. By the way, this is how extradition negotiations work with countries that we don't have an extradition treaty with. So this is not some out of the world thing for a foreign government who's holding a foreign national, when another government comes and says, give us this person, for them to say, show us the proof, what kind of punishment are you going to do, all that kind of stuff. That's how it works between two sovereign governments, right? So Mullah Omar described bin Laden as a chicken bone stuck in his throat. He couldn't choke him, he couldn't swallow him, and he couldn't spit him out. He wanted to get rid of him just as much as we wanted to have him. So it wasn't to get bin Laden. And frankly, in the first 2 months of the war, bin Laden escaped to Pakistan. Why didn't we do that to Pakistan? And why did George Bush get on TV and say, well, bin Laden's just one person and he's either hiding or dead. This is about fighting terrorism. So it wasn't about bin Laden. And at that time, bin Laden had a couple dozen or a few dozen adherents to Al-Qaeda. It was not about that. And it certainly wasn't about making America safer or protecting or creating democracy in Afghanistan or any of the other nonsense we've been told. None of the things that we were told this was about. If you look at what's happening, none of that makes sense. All the nonsense that was done doesn't make sense if you look at it through the prism of the reasons we were told. But if you look at it through the prism of what would make the most amount of money for the crony corporations that make up the military industrial complex and the banks and central banks that make up the U.S. Federal Reserve petrodollar system, then it makes sense. Now it makes sense why all this money was wasted, while all this time was wasted, while all these lives were wasted. It would only make sense if it was to just be a giant boondoggle to raise a bunch of money for crony corporations and central banks. And we need to recognize that's what war is. It's a racket. It's not meant to be won. It's meant to never end. And we need to end it because it's making us less safe. It's costing lives. It's costing money. We threw 2 generations of some of our best and brightest in this country to go and fight this thing. And for what? It all fell in a matter of days. It was already falling even before that. And so I think that looking at Afghanistan and just U.S. foreign policy in general, we need to acknowledge the fact that our foreign policy is built around crony corporations, and we need to make it where the people who are signing up to protect and defend the Constitution and the American people against all enemies, foreign and domestic, need to be used for that. And if there's not an immediate need to protect the American people and our way of life, then they need to be right here where they belong at home.
And just for a larger issue, and you kind of touched on it, what does this all say about the nation building, the being the world's policeman? That now we've got the critics are saying, well, now this will just become another breeding ground for the terrorist strikes against the United States.
Right. So and they're not wrong. Like we took a country that wasn't actually an enemy. Their government wasn't an enemy. They didn't agree with us, and I'm sure they looked at us and thought that we were a bunch of decadent infidels or whatever. But they didn't care about us. And frankly, Bin Laden's only concern was the U.S. occupation. Again, if we stop listening to what the experts, the people that got us in this mess, if we stop listening to what they tell us why the terrorists hate us, and we actually read the words of Al Qaeda and ISIS and the Mujahideen and all the and Hezbollah and even Hamas and all these different groups, they all say the same thing. They're angry at the U.S. because of decades of invasions, destabilizations, bombings, occupations, assassinations, embargoes, genocides being carried out in countries like Yemen. They're sick of it. And, and that leads them, just in the same way that we were angry that the Twin Towers were toppled and we wanted blood, they've wanted blood for decades. And the best way to fight terrorism is to take away the recruiting, the main two ways that Al Qaeda and ISIS and these other groups recruit. And the first one is get rid of the demand, the desire to fight the U.S. by ending the occupations. They're helping no one but the military-industrial complex. And the second part of that is order the State Department and the CIA to stop arming and funding them. If you do those two things, we end terrorism by taking away the two main things that are feeding it. Nation building is a lie. They did not think that a nation would be built in Afghanistan. We know from the Afghanistan papers from 2 years ago, and we know from all the intelligence that was leaked in Iraq years ago, that no one who was actually in charge ever thought that we would be able to create any kind of a stable government in either of these countries, much less the Jeffersonian democracy BS that we've been sold for the last well over 20 years now, that we're going to create this flourishing, peaceful, democratic country that they don't want. They don't want our system. They never did. That was always a lie. Again, it was always about enriching crony corporations. Nation building is just another boondoggle to raise money for, Northrop Grumman and Boeing and Raytheon and Halliburton and Blackwater or BlackRock and all these different contractors, these crony corporations that spend millions and sometimes billions of dollars to get their favored politicians in office all through DC in order to ensure that they keep getting their gravy train in place. Jeff Bezos is now trying to get his hooks in with his no bid defense contracts too. So soon Amazon will be in on trying to keep these wars going. But nation building is a lie. Fighting terrorism is a lie. All these things were lies. It was about enriching people at our expense, our money, our time, our security, the lives of ourselves and our loved ones that went overseas. And I say ourselves, meaning those of you that served. I have not served, but our loved ones, those of you who did serve, those of you who did go over there or were, at the ready to go over there if need be. That all of that was used as cannon fodder and for the most cynical of reasons, and it needs to end.
Okay, well, let's turn to our other favorite topic, and that's COVID. We're now seeing mask mandates, demands for mandatory vaccinations, both by private employers and state universities, things like that. We'll probably start to see prohibitions again against gatherings. And of course, as libertarians, we feel like this ought to be a matter of individual choice.
Yes.
But I think what are your thoughts now that we have this Delta variant surging that everybody's worried about? Or do you think this is going to be another fight over this stuff?
Oh, do I think we're about to have another fight? Yes, I think that they are going to push lockdowns again, even though we have the last year plus of data to show us that the lockdowns did nothing. The lockdowns, if you compare similar states, like, for example, California and Florida, who had the same levels of the same kind of population density, the same overall seasonality, you see that the rates of spread were roughly the same in those states. Same thing with North and South Dakota. The media and the corporate media and government will say, well, yeah, but if you compare Vermont to Florida, or if you compare, they'll cherry pick states and say, yeah, if you compare this state that had lockdowns to this one that didn't, it was really, really bad. if you compare, but you could just as easily turn it around and pick a state that looks bad for the lockdown states and pick a state that looked good for the non-lockdown states and say, well, if anything, it shows that the lockdowns were more hurtful. It's not that. It didn't do anything. Short of being able to tell everyone you have to stay inside for 2 weeks and not even venture outside, which would kill tens of millions of people. I mean, the entire society would fall apart if we truly made every single human being in the country stay inside for 2 weeks. Short of that, you can't stop or slow the spread. People still have to go outside. So instead, what they did was they recreated the conditions for cold and flu season. You have to stay inside in your poorly ventilated homes with your closest loved ones, venturing outside only long enough to go to the same handful of places that literally everyone else is going for the same essential things, and then going right back inside to your poorly ventilated homes with your closest loved ones. That was never going to work. It was absolute nonsense. It was a holdover. By the way, we can blame Bush for all this. The lockdown plan was actually a holdover from 2005 when the bird flu was a potential threat. Now, keep in mind, the bird flu had a case fatality rate of 80%. They used a plan that was based on a virus that if it was able to cross the bird human barrier and become spread from human to human, would have been worse than any movie about any viral outbreak. They used that for a virus that apparently has a fatality rate of around 1.5%, give or take, somewhere between 1 and 2%, which, by the way, makes it actually somewhere around 10 times more deadly than the flu. So I'm not saying that COVID's not serious. It is a very serious virus. It should be taken seriously. This was not a serious proposition. Telling everyone just watch your life fall to pieces for however many months it takes, even as we watch it continue to spread out of control, was never a serious thing. Now, let's look back at why this even happened in the first place. For the first 2 months that the virus was here, they didn't allow testing. The FDA and the CDC did not allow testing. I remember after I went to the New Hampshire primaries during the campaign when I was still running for the nomination, and I got very sick, and I went to a doctor and I tested negative for flu A and flu B. And I said, do I possibly have this coronavirus thing? And the doctor said, we have no idea. There's no way to test. At that time, when she said that, I knew it was already everywhere, because that meant that no one knew who had it, right? We had American companies that were making millions of COVID-19 test kits every single week, and they were having to ship all of them overseas because the FDA and the CDC said, no, you can't do any testing. We'll make our own. And after about a month and a half or 2 months of realizing they were never going to be able to make their own test kit successfully, they finally let the healthcare workers do their damn job and actually try to test people and save lives. By then, it had spiraled out of control. Then you had many state governments, including in New York and Washington and New Jersey and Michigan and a few others, who inexplicably, they ordered the COVID patients to be put in nursing homes and disability centers. The places, which, by the way, these centers were saying we have no protocols in place to protect COVID patients from our residents, the people who are the most likely to die from COVID. And so instead of putting them in hospitals, they put them in the places where they were most likely to kill people. And so that's where we saw in the opening days of being told, we went from, there might be 8 cases of COVID to say there are tens of thousands of cases everywhere, and the fatality rate is somewhere around 10%. Well, yeah, because they're only testing old 85 and 90-year-olds who are the most likely to die from it. They harnessed the fear that their actions created to push for these lockdowns and these mandates and everything else, knowing that they would have never been able to get us to stay inside or get us to approve being told that we couldn't have church services, that we couldn't meet with our family members, that we couldn't operate our small businesses because that's unsafe. Everyone can go to Costco and Walmart and Target all day long, but my small furniture store, no, that definitely has to shut down. There could be 5 people in there at the same time. We would have never agreed to this nonsensical, draconian, tyrannical nonsense if so many of us hadn't been so scared from the beginning. And it was because of the conditions that they created. And they used it to rob us blind. They gave us a few $100 at a time, and they'd pass these stimulus and relief measures, where the vast majority of the money, trillions of dollars at a time, went to the crony corporations that always get these bailouts and the big government agencies that can, fill their coffers, while the rest of us got a few $100 and we got stuck for the bill, tens of thousands of dollars for every single American alive with interest. This is how government does everything. Create a crisis or make it worse. Harness the fear that creation or worsening of the crisis to push for more draconian measures, more power, more money, more tools to be able to use against us. When all of that fails, leverage that anger and fear to get even more money and even more power, grandstand on the bodies that you've created with your bad plans, and push for more measures, and all the while line your pockets and those of the cronies who put you in office. It is clear the lockdowns are nothing more than a way to keep us under control and intentionally harm our lives and livelihoods in order to push for more relief measures that they can use to rob us blind. It's obvious that any of these mandates are a proven failure. And no, I don't support. I believe that if you the vaccines, from everything I've seen, are more than likely very safe, although they haven't been around very long, but they're likely very safe. And while they don't apparently they don't really slow or stop the spread of COVID, they, at the very least, they are likely to keep you from getting very sick. And so if you are someone who that is important to you, and you believe that's the best thing to do, then you should get the vaccine. But no, I do not believe that the government should be mandating that you have to put a product in your body that is still technically in safety trials and efficacy trials for another 2 years, and which is produced by companies that by law have immunity from any liability for any adverse reactions, including death, that you might get from it, in order for you to be able to go to Walmart or school or the store, or to be able to go outside. I do not believe in these vaccine passports. I think that individual companies should be able to have their own criteria. If some company or store or whatever wants to say that, you have to have a mask or you have to be vaccinated or whatever, I as long as there's not government coercion behind that, I'd be okay with it. The problem is there is government coercion behind it, and there is government carrot and stick approach to this. We'll give you money, relief money, if you require this, but you might get penalized if you don't require it. That's now not a free market decision. That's not a company choosing on their own accord to do that. Remove those carrots and sticks and let whatever business decide to have whatever criteria they want. I'm perfectly fine with that, but remove the government coercion. Here's how we need to handle this. Here's how a libertarian government would have handled COVID. Allow testing, remove any kind of roadblocks, like, for example, certificate of need laws that are making it hard to be able to expand and open facilities that are needed to deal with pandemics. Get completely out of the way of the market. Let the healthcare workers do their damn jobs. Let the people know the best information we have at any given time, and allow them to make choices based on that. Don't pressure people, don't scare people, don't shame people, don't try to politicize something like masks or standing 6 feet away from someone. Just give them the information and let them do it. We were never going to stop this virus once it was here. That's just the reality of a respiratory illness that spreads as easily as a coronavirus does. It was always going to be here. So we needed to look at how do we move forward from there, and the libertarian way would have been much better.
Good. Let's turn to, you touched earlier about the debt to the future from all the spending and stimulus, but the
Yes.
Biden economic policy that's been launched here. He ran as a moderate Joe, and all of a sudden we get, he gets elected, and now he's Mr. Progressive,
Right.
with runaway spending and confiscatory taxes.
Yep.
I mean, the outcome, I think, do you agree, is going to be inflation for sure.
We're already seeing it. Yeah.
But do you think, what's your read on whether the tax increases that the Democrats have proposed will actually make their way through Congress?
Taxes are a tough one in DC. It's weird. They have made peace with the idea of spending just endless money and constantly raising the debt ceiling, or eliminating the debt ceiling.
Yeah,
Yeah,
both parties.
both parties. This is not a Democrat. If it makes anyone feel better, if Donald Trump had been reelected, he probably would be spending about the same amount of money that Joe Biden is. If that's any consolation, the only person that was running for office for president that would not have continued the ramping up of spending would have been Joe Jorgensen. There was literally no one else running that had any intention of lowering the spending or even lowering the rate of the increase of spending. With that said, and the reason for that is the deep state, or the so-called experts, the economic experts who have made quite a cottage industry for themselves in DC. All of them agree that the answer is just more and more spending. Keynesianism has completely taken over the thinking in DC when it comes to economics. Not anywhere else on earth, but just there, or anywhere else in the private sector, just there. The tax increases, I could see some tax increases getting through. This is a typical thing Democrats do, where they're like, we're going to tax everything. And that gets people, upset about this. And then they end up passing this much of an increase, and we all breathe the sigh of relief. And meanwhile, our taxes went up. So I do think some increases will go through. It's certainly nothing that will be able to plug the gap in terms of the amount that they're spending. We are looking at all of the Republican establishment of both parties and all of DC's, the entire swamp, if you will, has embraced the idea of constant year-over-year multi-trillion-dollar deficits. That's now the standard. They have completely embraced modern monetary theory, the idea that they can just print out endless money, and they can print it out faster than it loses value. By the way, a little bit of a side note here. And this, I think all the gold bugs will love me on this one. This is why the military industrial complex and why the imperial foreign policy has to exist in order to preserve this system. Your U.S. Treasury, your U.S. Federal Reserve notes that you have that we call money, the only reason they have any value whatsoever is for two main reasons. Number one, you are required by law to pay all taxes at the local, state, and federal level using fiat currency. Even if you did transact it in some other currency, you have to convert the portion that you paid in taxes to fiat currency, which means that it's really just easier to use fiat currency for most things, right? Like these people coming home from the Olympics who have these gold medals, they have to pay a tax on it, and they can't just carve off a chunk of the gold and hand it to the government. They have to actually convert some of it to fiat. So a lot of them end up just selling the thing because they don't have 30 grand in their power, whatever the cost is. And so that forces us to use fiat currency. But it's worse than that. The second reason is because anytime that there is a government whose central bank does not hold U.S. Treasury IOUs, which is the Federal Reserve's currency at this point, doesn't hold U.S. Treasury bills, IOUs, as their foreign reserves, just so happens to be the worst countries in the world, the axis of evil, the countries that absolutely need to be liberated and brought democracy and freedom. North Korea, Venezuela, formerly Iraq, formerly Afghanistan, I would imagine soon to be Afghanistan again, formerly Libya, Yemen. All of these are countries that don't use the U.S., what they call the petrodollar system. And this is a big part when I talk about enriching the central bankers. Yes, it makes a bunch of money for the military industrial complex, but what it also does is it forces there to be, if everyone's willing to accept all this debt, well, then that must mean that the US dollar is really worth something. Well, they're only accepting the debt at the point of a gun, but they're accepting it. So this is a big part. This imperial form, for anyone who thinks that just spending endless amount of money is a good thing, and there are an increasing number of libertarians who are like, we need UBI and we need to embrace MMT. Okay, great. Then you need to embrace endless mass murder around the globe, because that's what maintains that. That pretending that this U.S. Federal Reserve note has value only comes from forcing people to pay taxes with it and forcing foreign central banks to accept our debt as their foreign reserves. So it all ties together. But going back to your original thing, though, I think they're going to pass some of the taxes. It's not going to be anywhere near enough to plug the gap on debt, which means that your money will lose more of its value, which means the cost of things will go up. This never ends until we kick these clowns out of office.
Let's, speaking of out of office, let's talk about the Libertarian Party for a minute.
Yes.
You know, I think, in my opinion, lots of people are libertarians and they just don't know it. How do we get out there, get our message out there to people? How do we convince people that we're not just, a fringe party, but rather a movement, if you will, to, of freedom, both personal and economic?
Yeah. So no, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead and answer that.
Yeah. So there's two main parts to that. Number one, and we have to look at what I think our issue is. We have a couple issues, and obviously the ballot access laws and things like that. They're why we aren't the preeminent party in the country, but they're not why we are as small as we are. This party was founded as a protest by a small handful of nerdy gold bugs in reaction to Richard Nixon ending the Bretton Woods standard and taking us off the gold standard for temporarily for good, and all of the terrible things that have happened as a result of that. But not problem, but as a result of who created this party and what it was created for, it has largely remained, in many cases, an act of protest over economic policy. And we primarily message to people on economic terms. Well, most people aren't, you can't even reach them on policy terms, much less economic ones. You have to reach them on an emotional level because that's how they process things. Libertarians tend to be more cerebral than the general public. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it has been a disconnection there with the general public. When we're hearing their concerns, we're immediately talking about first principles and policy issues, and we talk about the NAP and a lot of stuff that they need time to get that. So there's two main things there. There's that making that emotional connection by meeting people where they are, and then there's addressing their reasons where even if we have met them where they are and they do agree with us, they still have objections to voting for us. But let's start with the meeting them where they are. Most people tend to process things with more of a combination. Everyone processes things with some combination of intellect, intuition, and emotion. We tend to be pretty high on intellect, pretty low on emotion and intuition compared to the general public. We have to meet people where they are. If someone's concerned about healthcare, instead of arguing with them about whether or not healthcare is a right, or arguing with them about how the debt that's created from such a system, from a free healthcare system, empathize with them, validate their concern. Yes, our healthcare system's terrible. I mean, look at the lives that have just been lost, right? Compared to most other developed countries. We're on the high end of that, right? Our government is spending more money per patient of taxpayer money than almost any other country on earth. There's like 4 other countries that spend more per patient. So we definitely have a government commanded system. And then we're having to pay 2 or 3 times that out of pocket. We're paying way more than the developed national average per patient, even adjusted for purchasing power. And we certainly aren't getting anywhere near that difference in terms of quality. If anything, sometimes we're getting less than they are. But let's look at why that's happening. So what do I do there? I empathize with the person. I agreed with them. I explained that I even understood just how bad it was. And then I shifted to what the problem is. Now we can start talking about things like certificate of need laws, cost plus legislation, the fact that something like 30% of every dollar, 30 cents on every dollar that's spent in healthcare is going to some kind of fine or fee or tax of some kind at the local, state, or federal level. We can talk about how the insurance red tape that was built into an insurance system that the market never wanted. FDR, his threats of his World War II threats of pay caps led to the companies creating comprehensive health insurance. It was nothing we ever actually wanted. That this comprehensive health insurance system creates such a unnecessary and draconian web of red tape that it makes it impossible for a doctor to even tell you what your service costs until weeks later, and it has to be run through thousands of administrators and find out what the cost is. And of course, all those administrators have to be paid. And everything that's all of these bad policies, patent protections for big pharma. I could spend an hour talking about this stuff, right? But we can talk about our solutions. We can talk about the problem and then talk about our solution, which is to get rid of that stuff and to implement reforms that will be able to allow you to have more control and to bring back the price equilibrium in healthcare. We can do that once we show people we care first. There's an old phrase, I think it was Teddy Roosevelt of all people who said, no one knows what you care. No one cares what you know until they know that you care. Show them you care, then show them we understand, then show them that we know how we got here, and then show them that we have the solutions. When you do that, you can connect them. Now, once you've made that connection, or once you're talking to the, 65, 70% of Americans who already want a viable third party to vote for, you have to address the reason why they still don't vote for us. The biggest reason that they don't vote for us, and it's the most frustrating. I hope I'm probably going to hear some groans when I say this. You can't win. I'm not going to vote for you until I know you can win. And what do we say? We're not going to win unless you vote for us, right? Like, it's the most maddening and upsetting thing on earth. But the reality is most people are not pioneers or first adopters. They're not early adopters. They are not going to want to get in on the ground floor. They want to make sure their vote isn't being thrown away, because God knows, this election is far too important to not vote for the people who created the mess we're in. But rather than arguing with them about that, change the narrative. Instead of us focusing so much on our presidential candidate, our gubernatorial candidate, our congressional candidate, people that we know at this point have almost no likelihood of winning. Yes, we still need to run them. Yes, they still play an important role in terms of, securing ballot access, helping spread the message at a national or statewide level. Why aren't we focusing where we actually win? Why aren't the heroes of this movement, the people we've gotten elected to city councils, county councils, state legislatures, that we can actually show are accomplishing libertarian goals, not just talking about libertarianism, but actually accomplishing goals and actually winning people to liberty at the local level by showing how libertarian governance works? That kills that narrative. You can't win turns into, wow, you guys are really growing, aren't you? Wow, you guys are winning everywhere. The next big objection, which is your ideas sound like a freaking pipe dream, turns into, wait, no, this is working. You guys are in all these city councils and county councils, and even before you guys get elected, you guys are showing up and pushing for referendums and initiatives to be passed, and you're pushing for legislative goals, and you're getting them passed, and they're really working. I'm going to give you guys a chance. They might not give us a chance at the federal level yet, but they'll at least give us a chance at where they think we can win. And from there, then we can win at a higher level and at a higher level. And eventually, yeah, we will be able to win at the White House. We have to meet people where they are, and we have to address their objections instead of arguing with them. Actually look at their considerations, and we have to build this party up from the grassroots up. We don't believe in trickle down anything. So why are we waiting for someone to win the White House and trickle down liberty to the rest of us, right? We talk about the down ballot as though everything comes from the top and then it works its way down. No. We need to be talking about how the grassroots, decentralized grassroots affiliates and candidates working at the local level and connecting with their communities are going to grow this the way that we always grow things, from a decentralized level, working their way up as the market demands. So let's do it that way. If we do it that way, we're going to grow this movement. When we're doing our 100-year anniversary, we're going to be doing it from the White House, and probably long before that even.
Okay. Do we have any questions from our group here? Or Ross, anything coming over Facebook? Or bear with us just one sec here.
Yeah. Take your time.
I don't see anything on Facebook. Okay. Hold on, I think we may have one here for you, Spike.
Sure.
Give me a chance to bounce it. Take something. Hello?
Hi.
So yeah, the question is, on the mask mandates, one interesting thing I've noticed is that there's been a shift in the types of masks being worn. It used to be everybody was wearing these cloth masks that we have found out are extremely ineffective.
Right.
And then now all of a sudden you're seeing people shift these paper masks. And it's interesting that the paper masks are slightly more effective, but it's interesting that the news media has been not very forthcoming on the effectiveness of these masks.
Yeah.
Even though there's been studies dating back to 2015 on them. And I was just wondering, I don't know how the news media just doesn't seem to be doing very good. I'm talking about the corporate news media, like this,
Yeah.
the major network news media doesn't seem to be too interested in getting the truth out there on a lot of stuff, including mask effectiveness and a whole bunch of things like that. I just want to get your thoughts on that.
Sure. Yeah. So the thing, and I'm sorry, is this was this Reed I was talking to?
No, it's Ross, who's our affiliate chair.
Okay, Ross. Thank you for your question. It's weird because the CDC has come out and said these cloth masks aren't super effective. If you're going to be out and masking on a regular basis, it's the N95 that is really the effective one, right? Like it's the one that really not only ensures that you're not putting out anything out into the world, any of your expectorants or whatever out into the world, but also actually largely protecting you from others as well. The cloth masks are not super effective, and or the surgical masks aren't super effective. I think part of the reason why so many people were wearing cloth masks last year is that the PPE providers were so overwhelmed with demand, and government regulations were making it nearly impossible for them to ramp up the supply, and so the demand just had to eventually slow down. The supply had to just slowly catch up with the demand, a lot slower than it would have in a truly free market. But all that to say, you have the CDC saying, yeah, these cloth masks or these surgical masks and certainly the cloth masks are not super helpful. They don't work that well. But then when Rand Paul says it, he gets his YouTube account or he gets that video blocked and his YouTube temporarily blocked. And so there's definitely a politicization there. And I mentioned that before. We've politicized masks. We've politicized washing your hands. We politicized standing outside. We politicized standing 3 to 4 feet away from people. I've never been someone that wants to get up in people's faces, and I've had times where I'm standing 3-4 feet from someone, and they'll go, "Oh, are you scared of the cooties?" And I'm like, "No, I just don't want to smell your breath." Like, I mean, is that okay? Can we have some distance between us? So everything's been politicized, and it's because the Republicans and Democrats made sure to politicize stuff. But going back to the specific thing with the masks, I think the reason that the corporate media is being really coy about the whole thing, and big tech as well, in banning people who are saying what we all know to be true, that this cloth mask is not going to protect you from everything, is because it really kills the case for mandates. If this thing is only, if everyone wearing a mask under surgical conditions, which means you never touch the front of it, you only touch the side. I watch people all day long. They're fiddling with their masks. I'm not wearing a mask, and I'm thinking you guys are going to get whatever's out here because you're touching your face 15 times in just the time I've been looking at you, and your nose is hanging out. So anything I'm breathing in, so are you. And doing all this basic stuff that doesn't work completely eliminates the need or actually makes it worse. The more you're touching this thing, which might have microbes in it, the worse that it's going to be. It's better if you just weren't touching your face at all. And so, unless everyone is wearing them in the most perfect of conditions, you're not going to see a major decrease in hospitalizations and deaths. In fact, the CDC's own data, they did a study, and within their reference period, which was I think 20 to 30 days, they didn't see any difference in hospitalizations or deaths in the areas that had mask mandates and the ones that didn't. And they said, oh yeah, but 60 days out and later, we did see a reduction. Well, by then you can't attribute that to masks. And it's interesting because the CDC, who has very strict criteria for when they determine if something is safe and effective, they're completely ignoring those when it comes to lockdowns, masks, and vaccines. It's amazing to witness them ignore their own criteria for what they will allow to be considered safe and effective. And again, I'm not telling you not to get the vaccine. If you want to get the vaccine, get the vaccine. It's more than likely very safe and very effective. It might save your life. If you want to wear a mask, wear a mask for no other reason than your own comfort. And if you want to, if you want to stay home and you're able to do so, then do it. Like whatever you feel you should do, do it. But yeah, the reason they're not telling the truth about the masks is because they know everyone's not going to go out and buy N95 masks. They're just going to say, why do we have to mandate this? And especially for the kids. Like I've talked to parents of kids who are at these schools with mask mandates. They're like, my 7-year-old leaves, comes home with someone else's masks. It's, you know, someone else's mask because they like that Ninja Turtle better than the one on theirs, or they're trading them like Pokemon. And the thing is just absolutely filthy. Can you imagine a 6-year-old with a mask on all day? Like how filthy that must be. That is not keeping anyone safe or healthy. And anyone who thinks that is absolute foolishness. You know, if someone is not old enough to understand the concept of why they're wearing the mask, and that includes a lot of adults, then, you know, they shouldn't be wearing it. And it really goes down to, if you want to wear the mask, then you're also more than likely going to be doing it right. And if you don't, then you're probably going to end up being more of a liability than an asset by wearing the damn thing.
Once again, an individual liberty issue, right?
Individual liberty. Yeah.
Anything else? Yes. Good.
Yeah, that's fine.
Hey Spike, it's Orion. I don't know if you remember me.
Yeah, I remember you. Hey man, how are you doing?
What's up? Good, man. So I kind of wanted to talk about the situation in Afghanistan a little more.
Sure.
Part question. First part question is, now that we have this, Taliban taking over governmental power of the country again, we're going to see a lot of people who were recently born in that country and who have never had the Taliban in power before. They're going to start getting their personal liberties taken away by this newly imposed government. So I feel like, it's kind of our duty, not only as like people of a free country, but especially as libertarians, to, stand by our brothers and sisters over there. What's your plan on addressing that?
So, and Orion, you're 100% correct. And this is also a longer tail, a longer tail effect of imperialism. Who the hell are we to go over there and tell them they need to respect people's liberties after we've been bombing and destabilizing and assassinating and invading, killing something like 100,000 Afghan civilians? And even if we're right, even if we go over there and say, hey, listen, you shouldn't do this to people. You shouldn't treat people this way. You should be able to let people live their lives. You shouldn't be, they've announced it's illegal to be homosexual again in Afghanistan, and that the punishment is death. So all these people that have been openly gay because they were told that they could be openly gay, now they're going to be rounded up and killed. Women who are suspected of being raped will be executed for adultery. Like they're returning all the most horrific iterations of the most fundamental, and I shouldn't even say fundamentalist. This is a radical interpretation, a skewing, because I've spoken with a lot of Muslim scholars who say the Wahhabist interpretation of Islam is a joke. It is like the Westboro Baptist Church version of Islam. And honestly, the only reason that it's as widespread as it is because of US and Saudi funding. But that's a whole other subject. Who the hell are we now to go over there and say, hey, guys, it's us, the ones that just left after bombing the shit out of you for 20 years and destroying everything and then trying to rebuild it in our image. By the way, we think you guys should just let the people be gay, or, let people, have sex out of wedlock, or let them have different religions. We think that'd be nice, right? We are the devil in the Middle East and in Central Asia. And understandably so, not just our government, because in the same way that we have a hard time differentiating between government and the people, they have a hard time differentiating between government and the people, right? They don't really have a concept of America other than the frickin' bombs and drones and tanks and fighters. So it's hard for us, the devil, to go over there and say, hey guys, remember us? We're happy to talk with you. We think you should be respecting people's liberties. I do believe that we should be having that conversation. And if you look at, for example, Vietnam, a few years later, after they no longer hated us so acutely, and once they realized they wanted a trading partner, then yeah, we were able to go over there and start, having trade relations and having diplomatic relations with them. But the very government that we were once in a, existential fight against, are now a trade partner. And as a result, there has been a slow lessening of civil liberties infringements by the Vietnamese government against the Vietnamese people. The economic infringements are pretty solidly in there, but these personal social liberties have been kind of slowly, and we've noticed that in most of the erstwhile communist South Asian world, is that they've just kind of slowly allowed people to have their liberties. And that's an interesting thing. That's just sort of a natural progression in most societies, is that as they become more prosperous, more and more people are like, all right, so why are you telling us how to live again? Why can't we just live how we want to live? I think that the best thing that we can do now moving forward, because it's easy for me to say, well, we shouldn't have invaded them, but we did, and that happened, and we're gone now, or we're leaving now. We're in the process of leaving. What do we do now moving forward? It's not going to be easy. Thanks to that imperialism, many people are going to suffer, and there's not much that can be done about it. Obviously, invading them isn't going to do anything, right? So here's what we do. Start now with saying, listen, this was bad. We shouldn't have done it. We should have just negotiated to get bin Laden. This sucked. We suck at it. We're very sorry. And we'd like to have whatever trade and diplomatic relations you would like to have with us. And we're also in the process of eliminating our presence in this entire region because we're clearly not welcome and it's not helping anyone. And we're going to dismantle the system that has built its prosperity on the continued subjugation and bombing and victimization of entire sections of the planet. So because we're doing that, we are hoping to be able to have some kind of a friendship or at least a civil relationship with you. When you open that dialogue and when you can start having trade and diplomatic relationships, over time, you can hopefully start having conversations about, hey guys, maybe it doesn't need to be this way. And it doesn't even need to come from government, because if they embrace trading with us, they eventually embrace our culture and our pop culture and our entertainment and our movies and our this and our that and everything else. And over time, it's going to naturally happen. Even in China, which is very strictly controlling what the Chinese people see, even internally within China, there has been a slow movement towards recognition of civil liberties. So, for example, it used to be illegal to be gay in China. They're now coming up with the standards for recognition of transgenderism. Being gay has been legal for quite some time in China. They're working on the structure for being able to recognize gay civil partnerships and gay marriages. This is just the natural reaction. The Asian world is going to be very tough when it comes to bodily autonomy for drugs. And that's for two reasons. Number one, they have a long history of telling people what they can and can't put in their bodies. And number two, they have dealt with some very serious issues with, like, in the past, with like the opium trade, now with the heroin trade, the poppy trade. There's some very bad. You think our opioid epidemic is bad, or our dealing with the war on drugs is bad? Theirs is exponentially worse. And so culturally, that's going to be a hard one. But at the very least, we can start seeing some economic improvement and some liberty improvement. It's going to be a long, hard slog, Orion. Like this, we have framed ourselves as absolute monsters in that region, and there's not much we can do about that. And we're going to have to work to undo that reputation as monsters. Unfortunately, and folks, I hate to do this, I have a 10 o'clock interview. I'm being interviewed by RT. I've become the Russian government's favorite libertarian. So I get interviewed by them about every second or third day, and they interview me at 10 at night. So unfortunately, I do have to go. If there were any other questions, Tom, if you can get the questions, pass them along to Brian. I'll be happy to answer them in like text in email form. And that way, anyone who had any questions here, I'd be happy to answer it.
Thank you very much for your time.
Hey, thank you guys. I really appreciate y'all. Have a great night, guys. Thank you so much.
Well.